Can you start out by telling us your name and spelling it for us?
Sure. Name is Jeff Oberdorfer, Oberdorfer.
And Jeff, what's your connection with Kent State?
I was a student in the architecture school from 1966 through 1971.
And what are your memories of May 1970?
Well, I was downtown the nights of the so-called riots. I lived downtown for 5 years on College Ave, and I was at Orville's, one of our favorite bars, and it was just a regular spring night, Friday night, and we heard that somebody was starting a fire outside in the street, and we went outside and looked, and there was some motorcycle gang members out there urinating on a fire, and people hanging around, and couldn't have been more than 100 people. And all of a sudden, the police from the city of Kent were there walking in uniform fashion, kind of with riot gear, telling us to move out of the way, and we all dispersed. And to me, it was not a really big deal. So it was, and actually I thought the police in the city of Kent did a very good job. There was no prejudicial things that were said like there were later from the National Guards and the state troopers. I thought they did a pretty professional job. How that and the burning of the ROTC building turned into a police riot is still a question. But the ROTC building went down the next day, and it was basically a shack. It had no value except symbolically. And then all of a sudden, we saw tanks coming into Kent. I think there were over 10,000 state troopers and National Guardsmen. And it was kind of like a circus in the sense that Kent is a very conservative suitcase school. So most students and faculty go home on the weekend. I think maybe 2,000 people live on campus. And then probably about another 1,000 of us live off campus. So there were actually at one point probably 3 to 4 times more National Guardsmen and state troopers than there were students. And students started coming back for the weekend because the guard was there. So it was kind of a bizarre situation. And some of the National Guardsmen we knew, they worked in the bars downtown, and they were just scared to death about what was going on. They were in the guard just to stay out of the Vietnam draft. So it was a very strange situation. And as things kind of picked up, more and more people came back to campus, and hundreds of people were in the Commons protesting the war and just watching what was going on with the guard. And people were walking around putting flowers in the guards' rifles, and there were officers in the guard that were arresting people for impersonating officers who had like Levi's and sneakers on, but an army shirt, which was real popular at the time to wear. And we heard a lot of stories about the officers in the guard and how they had scrapbooks from Korea and very, very bizarre kinds of things. And but still, on that Saturday, it was still kind of like a circus. Then the next day, on Sunday, we were up on campus again, and the architecture school where I went, Taylor Hall, was kind of a pseudo-Greek building up on the hill. And it always had this kind of sense of elitism to people, which was kind of a false kind of sense for it. But in front of it was the Commons, which was kind of the place where everybody hung out. It was an issue really of free speech and open space, democratic open space. And about mid-afternoon, the guards started marching us across and pushing us off campus. And nothing had happened besides the ROTC building and the so-called riots downtown. There was no major protests or anything. There was just a lot of students visiting campus again, all very peaceful. But when they pushed us back off campus, there was no way to get back downtown where I live. So we were pushed kind of towards the resident halls. And what I remember at that point was hiding from the guard behind a hill and trying to run into one of the resident halls. I think it was Prentice. And having the resident coordinators at Prentice lock us out. And students were knocking on the glass doors, let these people in, they're students, and the guard was pushing and pushing, and we were getting crowded right into the front door, kind of squashed, and they wouldn't let us in. So we had to run around the back of Prentice and kind of escape and go back downtown where I lived. And I remember telling a friend of mine who I was with, I could feel the tension in the air. And I think I even said, somebody's going to get killed. We got to get out of here. It was kind of a very strange circus-like environment, but at the same time, you could feel the anger and resentment from the officers of the Guard, not from the younger guys in the Guard, but also from the state troopers. They were really nasty. And of course, you're in this conservative campus, and there's tanks all over the place. And you're wondering, you know, this is like a joke. You know, it was almost like there were maneuvers and decided to come back through Kent. And we never thought that they had loaded rifles or that anybody would get shot. So the next day, May 4th, we're up on campus again in the Commons on my way up to the architecture school. And the Guard again started moving up to the hill near the architecture school. And a lot of students were behind the school, and we were in front in the Commons. And I remember tear gas being thrown back and forth, and then we saw the Guards squat down and aim and shoot. You can hear the rifles go off, and we knew somebody had gotten shot. But I couldn't see it because it was behind the architecture department. But then we heard the ambulances, and we heard people screaming, and we knew something had happened.
And when did you find out what happened?
You know, I don't think we knew until we heard it on TV and the radio. Because I remember getting hysterical phone calls from my parents, because one of the first things that went out is that somebody named Jeff from Long Island was shot and killed, and I'm Jeff from Long Island, so my parents were freaking out, trying to contact us. And I remember getting a phone call from them saying, I'm okay, we're getting out of here. And then martial law was declared, and we were told to leave Kent. And it was not just the students, but those of us who lived downtown were told to leave as well. So we kind of ran downtown, got our stuff, got on a motorcycle, and headed out to Hiram, which we heard was welcoming students from Kent. So it wasn't until I got to Hiram that I knew actually what had happened.
And what was your response? How did you feel when you found out?
I was in absolute shock. One, furious that people would be shot. Two, furious with the university for letting it happen, particularly the instructors and the administration, except for, I remember after the shooting, I still didn't know what happened, but Mike Lunine and Glenn Frank, Glenn was a geology professor and Mike Lunine was head of the Honors College, were trying to calm students down and talk to the Guard and try to make sure nothing else happened. But otherwise, the university kind of acquiesced and let this happen. So it's been something that's angered me ever since I graduated. And I refuse to go to graduation. I haven't ever talked to anybody at Kent State since then. I just don't even want to have anything to do with them. And I think that they're just an embarrassment. And the fact that they haven't come forward and talked about what happens or talk about how to deal with grief after it happened. And I was talking to some people. I said, I think the average high school, if there was a disaster like somebody got killed in a car accident, would do a better job of grief counseling than Kent State did.
Have you had other opportunities to share your story, your experience?
People have asked me to share my story, but basically more through assumptions. You know, when people hear I'm from Kent State, the first thing they say is, well, Penn State. And I said, no, Kent State. And they say, oh, is that where that happened? And when you try to start talking about it, people don't want to hear about it. I haven't found too many people who are really open to the truth about what really happened there. So that's been disappointing as well.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. There's so much happening in the country that's screwed up. I don't think people want to hear one more thing. It's kind of like enough is enough. How much can we take? But I think there's also a level of denial at Kent. And also, my sense being there was that Kent State was the beginning of the end for the 60s. That's when people found out that white middle-class college students could be killed, and that was kind of the end. So the whole counterculture kind of collapsed after that, and I don't think people want to hear it.
Why do you think it's important to tell your story about Kent?
Well, I think from a personal point of view, it's important just as kind of moving on beyond the grief and just it's almost post-traumatic in a way when you think about the fact that we watched people killed on campus, and then the year later I went back to graduate and nobody talked about it. But I think it's important also just historically. You know, I talked to my daughters who are 19 and 24. They have no idea what happened during that period, either at Kent State or with Nixon or with the war. So I think it's important to have real stories, because I don't think we've heard the truth yet about Kent State, about why the Guard was there, who invited them, why the university was so passive, why all the instructors left right afterwards and didn't protest martial law. A whole series of issues that just have never been resolved in my mind.
Who do you hold responsible for what happened to Kent?
Well, I think in the big picture, I would hold the governor responsible and Nixon for the kind of some of the things they said that made people really angry about the students in general, and the kind of Spiro Agnew aspects of what was going on. But basically, I hold the campus responsible. I hold the president of the university and the faculty senate responsible for not just standing up and saying this is a campus and it's a free speech issue. And I think they had to be manipulated by the Guard and the governor. I just can't see why else it's been hidden for all these years. There's no reason. The people who were there in 1970 aren't there anymore. It's not like anybody's going to be blamed. They probably either passed away or moved on.
At this point, what do you think it would take to heal the wounds from that day?
Well, I think on a personal level, just this process is healing, which is, I think, a tremendous process. But I think when all these tapes are compiled and try to find out the truth about what really happened, it's just, it was a transition point in my mind in United States history at that time, and the Cultural Revolution that was going on. And knowing how Kent State was manipulated into letting this happen would be really interesting. I tell friends quite a bit, because people think Kent State's a radical school. I said, no, it's actually a very conservative school, and this never would have happened at Harvard or Stanford. The faculty wouldn't have allowed it to happen. So what is it about a middle class, university like Kent State that would allow that to happen to their students? It's disgraceful, really.
How did what happened that day impact your life?
Well, one, I haven't gone back to Kent, and I probably never will. I do have a connection to the architecture department still, but I really still am furious with campus for what happened, and for even just what happened the year when we all went back the next year, that nothing took place. There was a couple of honors college symposiums about it, but that was it. But I think that what it made me realize is that people are real easy to give up certain freedoms. And freedom of free speech and gathering, I think, is absolutely critical. And that's what was sacrificed that day, besides the lives of people, that was a traditional place on campus where people gathered. There was never any problems with people gathering there. Thousands of people would gather for all kinds of reasons, even if it was just to sit out in the sun. It was kind of our space, and our space was taken away. And I was also really angry that the architecture department and some of the other departments that deal with issues like sociology and psychology didn't really, the year after or the years after that, discuss the issues from an open space and democracy point of view. And I actually tried to bring it up in my final year, where my thesis was on bringing people together in Kent, and nobody was interested. Not in the architecture department, not in the psychology department. It was just, this is just another crazy New Yorker at Kent State trying to make trouble. So that attitude seems pervasive at Kent, which is unfortunate.
Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's been really helpful.